All right, welcome back, everybody, to our serialization of Dr. Dave Regis's chess openings repertoire. And we've been looking at the French defense. And we've got just 4 more games to go. So French defense for black is Dr. Dave's recommendation against e4. And the French defense is e6. And we've already seen, 16 games. And we've got 4 more to go to wrap up our look at the French defense. And our first one today is from the Slovakian Under-18 Championship, no less, in 1996. The players are called Dusic and Komora. Okay, well, it's not a very long game, this one, to start us off. So e4, e6, d4, d5, and we have a exchange variation, and black plays c5. And perhaps not a surprise that we get one of these. We know Dr. Dave quite likes these isolated queen's pawn positions. The isolated queen's pawn there, isolated because there's no other black pawn next to it. And if you haven't seen me describe this before, it can either be a strength or a weakness. Basically, if all the other pieces come off in an endgame, it might become a target because it can't be defended by pawns. But at this stage of the middle game, it's controlling central squares. There's nice open files next to it. The black pieces can play nicely around it. So strengths and weaknesses, white would usually try to swap pieces off, try to blockade it, stop it moving forward, blah, 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 blah. But we don't want to go into too much detail here. This is supposed to be for new players. So, okay, so bishop takes c5 is played. Knight to c3, developing move. Knight to f6, developing move. Bishop to g5 pins the knight. Black just castles. And knight g to e2 is played by white. And I just say at this point, the game is basically level. Remember, 0 point something, at new player level is basically a level game. But knight g e2 is played in this game by white. And you'll see now that the bar will creep up a bit, perhaps towards -2, because the game now turns in black's favor. And how it does it is with a pretty typical sacrifice in this kind of position, with bishop takes pawn. And what happens, of course, is if white doesn't take the bishop, say white just plays king to f1, well, then the bishop can just come away and black's won a pawn. But if white does take the bishop, well, then white runs into some problems, because knight to g4 check uncovers an attack from the queen to the bishop. So at the very least, black is going to win a pawn. But after king to g1, well, that's a huge blunder. And if you want to see what black should do in this position that makes it such a huge blunder, then press pause and see if you can work out black's next move. Otherwise, I'm going to carry on in 3, 2, and 1. And of course, the king should have gone here, because from g1, it's on this horrible diagonal. Now the king can't go to f1 now, because queen here is mate, supported by the knight, remember. So all that white can do is delay the inevitable, just putting pieces in the way. But sooner or later, this can't be avoided. All I would say is when we go back to sort of this position here, game is pretty level. I suspect if I put the lines on the computer, will say knight f3 would be my guess. Yeah, sure enough, knight f3 is the recommended move with a dead level game. But knight g2 is now recommended, so nothing wrong with that at this point. But it's not liking bishop g5 much, because it's walking into this tactic that I just showed you. So knight to f3 and level game. Okay, let's have a look at our next one. And I have to say, we have in this one a very, very, very famous player playing the black pieces. And we're in Beersheva in 1978 for Tatai against Viktor Korchnoi. And Viktor Korchnoi, many chess people would say, is the best player to have never won the World Championship. He's certainly up there. I'm a fan of Paul Keres, who I think was robbed of the World Championship by World War II. He was just an unbelievable player around the very end of the 1930s and in the 40s. But Korchnoi would be in the argument. So let's see what the legendary player Korchnoi does with the French defense. So he's playing black. e4, e6, d4, d5, and we've got the exchange variation again. Let's just turn the lines off for the time being. Takes, takes, and bishop d3. So a very equal position. And once again, c5. I'm not remotely surprised that Dr. Dave recommends this for reasons I just mentioned, the aiming for the isolated queen's pawn positions. Knight to f3, knight to c6, queen to e2, check, bishop blocks, pawn takes, and of course the bishop can't recapture now because the bishop is pinned. But as you can see from the bar, the computer's not worried about black being a pawn down temporarily. Knight to f6, h3, preventing anything coming down here, presumably. Castles and castles. And now black recaptures. See, this pawn was never really going anywhere, unless white wanted to waste ridiculous amounts of time playing a3, b3, and b4. And while the white would have been messing around doing that, they'd have been getting squashed by black's better development. So bishop takes c5 and c3. Okay, starting to the idea of blocking the isolated queen's pawn from moving, but it does take the knight's best square away from it. Computer still thinks it's relatively level, although minus 0.9 in the hands of a player like Korchnoi starts to be quite handy. Rook to e8 from black to attack the enemy queen and take advantage of the open file. Queen moves, queen to c2, queen to d6 from Korchnoi. And now in this position, say slight advantage to black, but nothing massive. But in this position, white plays knight b to d2. And what does Korchnoi carry on with? Well, Korchnoi goes with the pretty spectacular queen to g3. Okay, now you can't play pawn takes queen. It's not legal because the pawn is pinned to the king. So what on earth are you going to do here? Because if you don't do anything, bishop takes h3 is coming and you won't be able to take back because that's pinned by the queen. So white played the move, bishop to f5. Sorry, I was just looking back at the book because, of course, I'm reading from Dr. Dave's book. Bishop to f5, and the point is that this was an attempt to prevent bishop takes h3 by blocking it. But as you can see, it's now -3. So, yeah. Do you want to try and guess Viktor Korchnoi's next move? Well, feel free to do so. Press pause now. Otherwise, I will carry on the game in 3, 2, and 1. Okay, and the move that's played, the best move in the position, is rook to e2, hitting the pinned piece again. This is a theme in chess. If a piece is pinned, it's paralyzed. You should go after it. And that's what actually happened. The computer's suggesting king to h1, but after then bishop takes here, queen takes, and bishop takes f2. Yeah, I mean, you can see for yourselves, you know, the white king is in all kinds of trouble. What actually happened in the game was instead of king to h1, white tried knight to d4, and after knight takes, white actually just resigned the game because at master level, what are you going to do? I mean, let's just for fun see what happens after you play pawn takes queen. Yeah, knight takes queen and check. Okay, so a -10 advantage. What else could you do in this position? If you play takes, you're just going to run into bishop takes and you've still got this horrible pin to deal with. Yeah, just a really, really nasty position. So well played, Viktor Korchnoi. Okay, let's get to our third game. And our third one is from the, I guess it's the Arabian Championship. So it's Morocco. We're in Casablanca in 2002, Adnani against Boubacar. And I'm going to play the first 14 moves pretty much straight through until we get to the critical moment, because it all goes wrong for white very quickly. So e4, e6, d4, and d5. And we've got an advanced variation here. So e5, c5, c3, knight to c6. So as with so many variations of the French, everything's going to aim at d4. Knight to f3. Queen to b6 coming up. There we go. Bishop to d3. So that's actually a pawn sacrifice. I think that's called, I was just going to say it's called the Milner-Barry Gambit, because technically black can now take, and has two pieces attacking this square and only the one white defender, but it's very, very dangerous. White gets quite a lot of tempo, quite a lot of gained moves, if you like, by attacking the black pieces in the middle of the board. They get a lot of compensation for their pawn, but whatever, that's not what we're going into, because we're not going to go for the Milner-Barry. Instead, we have bishop d7, which is fine. Castles from white. Pawn takes from black. Well, perhaps we are going to go for the Milner-Barry. Okay. Pawn takes from white. So knight takes, and queen takes, and knight to c3. Okay, so what's going on here? Black can play queen takes e5, and in theory is 2 pawns up. Count them. I mean, count them. There they are. 1, 2. They're in the middle of the board, 2 pawns up. And yet the computer isn't saying -2. The computer's saying -0.3. And that's because of the amount of compensation that white has got for these sacrificed 2 pawns. Let's have a look at it. The black queen is in the middle of the board, vulnerable to attack, for example, moves like that. The black king is some way from castling unless he wants to castle this side into a potential open line. Black is definitely behind on development. So lots and lots of compensation, as we call it in chess, for the sacrificed pawns. And of course, white is to move. So rook to e1. So once again, the queen has to move. Queen to d6. Queen to f3. And you can see, well, before queen to f3, the computer actually thought white was winning. But queen to f3 is played. Bishop to e7. Bishop to f4, attacking the queen again. Queen to b6. Queen to g4, threatening here. And knight to f6. Now, black allows white to take this pawn on g7. And in fact, white obliges, takes. And this is not a great move. It's not so hard to see that the queen's attacking the rook and that the rook has to move here to attack the queen where it's defended by the knight. But after queen to h6, what is the little trap here? What has white fallen for? What's the best black move here? Well, I've left the lines on so you could cheat and see. But it's knight to here. And this does 2 things. First of all, it's now attacking f2, and so there is a horrible threat of queen takes pawn. And secondly, it's attacking the queen. And there's really not much white can do to get themselves out of a pickle. And in fact, in the game, white resigned in this position. But let's just play the best few moves according to the computer just to see where it can go. Takes, takes, takes. And what we've got here now is 5 white pawns against 6 black pawns, but an extra bishop for black. So 2 pawns ahead, 2 points ahead with compensation. This move gets played, so white gets another point back. But yeah, with the extra bishop on the board at strong chess levels, this is really not looking good for white. And that's why they resigned. Okay, let's turn those lines off again. And we have one more game to go. And that game is Mikhail against Miljanic from Montenegro in 2004. So, okay, let's go through this because in the final position, there's quite a bit of analysis from Dr. Dave. So here we go. So e4 and e6 and d4 and d5. And we've got the exchange variation. So takes and takes and bishop to d3. So very safe. None of them, the white doesn't play the Monte Carlo that is recommended by Dr. Dave when you're playing white in this position, but goes for the safe bishop to d3. Knight to f6, c3, uber safe in the middle of the board, just defending the center. Nothing wrong with it, but just very, very cautious approach. Bishop to e7, h3. White doesn't particularly want to play knight f3 and then have a bishop appear on this square, so protects that square. Castles. knight to f3. And here's the classic Dr. Dave move, c5. So going for that isolated queen's pawn position. Takes from white, takes from black, castles from white, queen to d6, and now knight b to d2. And this is obviously a bit of a mistake. If I actually just put that back, you can watch the bar. The bar at this point, actually the computer thinks is pretty level, maybe the tiniest of edges to white, but 0.5, 0.6, 0.7, 0.9, it's crept up a bit, but not too bad. But after knight b to d2, it goes back completely the other way. Well, why? What on earth does black do? Well, here's a little sacrifice to commit to the memory banks. Bishop takes pawn. Pawn takes bishop. And now watch this. Queen to g3 check. You can't play pawn takes queen. It won't let me because that f pawn is pinned. So this isn't very nice. Okay, so if you can't take, you have to move the king. No other legal move. Queen to here, and the king goes back to g1. So what happens? Do you go for more, says Dr. Dave in the book? Yes, of course you do. So the move that was played was simply knight to c6, just develop. White, knight to b3, presumably hoping to bring this out. There's only -2, -1.3. Computer's a bit up and down with the analysis, but definitely a bit of an edge to black. The knight here, hoping to bring the bishop out and attacking the black bishop. And the black bishop moves, not surprisingly, to here, because now there might be nasties on this square, not yet because of the white knight, but there could be some nasties on that square. And rook e1 from white. So take the open file, but also with an eye on the king being able to run, perhaps if need be. Knight to g4 played by black. So lots of things aiming at this square now. White in the game played bishop to e3, and now black dives in. Bishop to h2 check was played. The knight took, the queen took, and there's the empty square that we talked about. Now, queen here isn't going to be checkmate because of the bishop, which is the whole point of that move a minute ago. But black can still bring other pieces into the game, and did. Knight from c to e5. So really, really bringing all the pieces across to the attack here. You can see the computer thinks this is pretty good for black, pretty dangerous, even though they're a piece down, piece or a couple of pawns down. Very, very dangerous attack. Knight to d4 played by white, presumably trying to bring pieces back to the, not like that, trying to bring pieces back to the defense of the king. Queen to h3 from black. King goes back to g1. Now, I'll just show you, if you go to e2, you actually get into some trouble because takes is just winning the piece. If you play pawn takes, then actually queen here is just checkmate. So that was a bit nasty. So the king has no choice now. It can't run. It has to go back to g1. And after the move f5, white actually resigned. And I can put the lines back, but basically there's just no defense here. You're just going to get crushed. You've got the pawn coming through, maybe to here, and then the queen mates on this square. You've got the threat of queen here. You can bring the rook up and bring the rook into the attack. It's just horrible, and it's -5. Let's see what the computer thinks are the best moves. Yeah, so straight away the computer's recommending just sacrificing the bishop, look, just giving away a bishop. Takes, rook takes, presumably, yeah. And after knight takes, knight to f3 check. Is it going to be queen takes? Yeah, queen takes knight, presumably queen takes queen. Knight to e7. I was going to think it would play knight to e7 check, but it actually wants to go knight to d4. But we can stop there. You can see for yourselves that white's doing very well. Thank you, with an attack still going and an extra queen on the board. Okay, so that is our last bit for the French defense as black. So what have we done so far? So we've investigated after e4, we've learned e5, we've learned e6, We've learned the D6, G6 systems. We've seen some games with the Alekhine defense, the Caro-Kann defense, the Sicilian defense, and even the Scandinavian defense. We've done all that as white. And from the black point of view, we've looked at a response to E4, and Dr. Dave has shown us 20 games in the French defense. But what if white doesn't play E4? Well, the last few videos will be about what to do against pretty much everything else that white can play, mainly D4. And that's where we will be going to in the next video. So hopefully you'll be able to join me for that. And I look forward to seeing you then. Thanks for watching.